Hi there. Welcome to Help Solve the Case. It is Christine Burke here with day 4 of the Tyler Robinson preliminary hearing in the Charlie Kirk case. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for all the subscriptions, for subscribing, for joining me here. I am so excited to have you. Thank you so much for helping me on my mission. And boy, today we have a lot to get through. We have a lot to get through. And I just want to preface this with there's more to come. We're talking about the preliminary hearing. And even though I've had all this experience, thank you all for so much great feedback. I don't know everything. I am watching this through my lens of experience. And there's a whole lot that we don't know. And this is why we're watching it, so that we can learn and figure out where we need to go look for more potentially. Okay. What is coming down the pike, so to speak? All right. And I want to say too that after this preliminary hearing is done, I'm going to take everything and go in a succinct line by line item and give you my thoughts as to whether the probable cause has been met. Okay. So this is just, I'm trying to give you a daily overview of what caught my eye, where I think they're going, what the state is saying, what the prosecutor is saying. So let me get into that. I want to show you here. Hopefully you guys can see this. I pulled up because we have heard ad nauseum from both sides. We had it again this morning, the back and forth about what is a preliminary hearing. Change my layout, folks. Okay. And, what exactly is a preliminary hearing? So I asked AI, it's obviously AI, for a Utah preliminary hearing, right? So it says the probable cause standard is different from the standard for issuing a search warrant. The purpose of the hearing is not to determine guilt, but to determine whether the prosecution has presented enough evidence to bind the defendant over for trial. Okay, so we know that, all right? Under Utah law, the prosecution must establish probable cause that the charged crime was committed. Remember, in the previous videos we talked about, in the first video, I went through the elements of the crime. And right now I'm a little iffy on some of them, but as I said, I'm going to put it all succinctly together after all the days are done, and we're going to go into the nitty-gritty, okay? I'm going to look at it like myself as a police officer was writing the charging document, okay? And we have to have probable cause that the defendant committed it, okay? It says here, this is a low evidentiary threshold. The judge does not weigh credibility the way a jury would, resolve conflicting evidence, or decide guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And those are important words based on the fur that was flying today. And you will see, we're going to talk about, like I put on the thumbnail, language matters, okay? The state actually said that towards the end of the day, and I have to chuckle because I talk about semantics all the time and about the wording, and thank you to those of you that question me about it, because the words matter. The interpretation of the law matters, okay? And they're doing some craft here, really going at the language and the defenses. And so it was very interesting to me that the state stood up finally and said, language matters. So it does, okay? But we're going to talk about these things, about the credibility and all that stuff. It says, instead, the judge asks whether the evidence would warrant a person of ordinary caution and prudence, okay, could be y'all, in believing the defendant committed the offense. Key features of a Utah preliminary hearing. The state bears the burden of establishing probable cause. The judge views the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution when deciding whether the burden has been met. The defense may cross-examine witnesses and present evidence, although many defense attorneys reserve most of their case for trial. We are not seeing that here. Hearsay is permitted to a much greater extent than at trial under Utah's preliminary hearing rules, so investigators often testify about information they receive from others. 1102s, police reports, okay? It says, a leading case here is State v. Clark, where the Utah Supreme Court explained that a preliminary hearing is a screening device, not a mini trial, and the magistrate's role is to determine whether there's probable cause to believe the defendant committed the charged offenses, not whether the state has proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they say here, practical implications here from a defense perspective, successful arguments at a Utah preliminary hearing often focus on, let's see, an essential element of the offense lacking any supporting evidence. I think we have some issues there. The state's evidence being entirely speculative. And that is a word that I'm going to talk about today that hopefully you'll see where I'm going to focus on that. Rather than supporting a reasonable inference, the prosecution asking the court to stack inference upon inference without underlying facts. It's like trying to put Swiss cheese together and cover the holes to make it more supportive. The state failing to identify the defendant as the perpetrator with sufficient evidence, and even take any evidence in the light most favorable to the state, it does not establish probable cause as to one or more elements. Okay, it's not like a trial where it's all or nothing. Okay, it can go piece by piece. All right, so that is what we're going to talk about. All right, so I have my notes here, and I got a lot of notes. They were going to town and talking about a lot of things. And I'm reading from my notes. So, they started out with Agent Davis again. We had seen him, and they started showing a Zoom call with, remember, we were going back and forth about whether we were going to hear from Twiggs about the interview, okay? And it started out with a Zoom call after some arguing, of course, that was done on April 20th, 26. And Investigator Davis started off by saying, and whether we like this or we don't like this, he started off by saying, I want you to know, right, that there's a federal agreement in place and there's a state agreement in place for materials that you discuss here today. Okay, and so you asked me about that. That's the use immunity. All right, and that was for Lance Twiggs. So some of you asked, can they be charged? Well, depending on the parameters of what discussed today involves, that ship has sailed, apparently, okay? And we've been talking about some things related to the evidence, right? That the state has put on, some of the findings. So they described, right? They went through, and this is, going to be visible, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But they talked about how they met. They talked about how long they were dating. Now, parts of it were removed. We couldn't see it. Talked about jobs. And then they talked about on the morning of that Tyler had said that he was going to have a long drive to work that day. All right. That he left early. That typically, right, because I think it was 3 hours away, 3 or 4 hours away, that typically when he left early, he would leave at 5. But Twiggs thought it was maybe more like 4, but he was unsure because Twiggs got up at 12 or 1 p.m. that day. They talked about a group chat message that was sent apparently on the Discord. And Twiggs said that he did not personally hear from Tyler Robinson until 11 p.m. that evening, okay? Then we had a portion that was skipped out, possibly showing these messages and stuff. And he was asked, Twiggs was asked, was Tyler engraving bullets before the incident? And Twiggs said that Tyler had asked about the Dremel because he wanted to engrave some bullets for a camping trip, talking about a camping trip. I believe he was going with his family. And Twiggs said, make sure not to set off a bullet in the house. They said he didn't really know how long the decision to engrave the bullets was, but at most a month before, and that he had been talking about a camping trip for about 2 months, hunting and camping. That's what he was referring to. Then they went to the note, and they started talking about the note that was left under the keyboard and mentioned in the first text to Twiggs. And Twiggs said he read it, he put it back down on the desk, and he took a picture of it, and he did not see it again. And this came after a text from Robinson at about 11 p.m. on September 10th. Twiggs indicated that he and Robinson had different bedrooms. They had separate bedrooms. Then they talked about the series of messages. They talked about the Discord server, that even though Twiggs was on there, that the Discord server was mostly Tyler Robinson's friend group, people he would play Dungeons and Dragons with every week. And they discussed the screen names and some of the people that were there. The last text that Twiggs got from Robinson was around 8 p.m. on the 11th. And Twiggs said that he didn't think that Tyler had messaged anybody before he messaged him on the 10th. He said that he saw Tyler when he woke up on September 11th. And he came back to the house, Tyler did, before going to his parents' house. And then it blacked out. Twiggs talked about Tyler acting erratically. Okay, so this was after the text, apparently because pieces are missing, it's kind of hard to keep track here, that this was after Tyler had let him know, apparently, right, allegedly, what he had done. He was still up at Utah Valley, up in the Orem area, and then he came home, okay? So Twiggs was saying he was acting erratically, and by that he meant he was walking around a lot. Asking about, did he say anything, were they discussing what happened? And he said he didn't go into detail. He said that Robinson started crying a little bit and said he wished he hadn't done it. He went blank again. Then they said eventually Tyler said he would talk to his parents or turn himself in. And Twiggs did not want to be at the apartment when that happened. The investigator asked him if prior to Tyler texting him, if he had seen anything about the shooting. And he referenced, he thought it was an Instagram link. And he said that he saw images of the suspect on the 11th. They also talked about the FBI website press releases and showing 6 images of the suspect. Now, Twiggs said, while he made some acknowledgement that it did look like Tyler, he said, I would not say with 100% certainty. He said he's usually wearing a hat. He was methodically going through the clothing. That was the pictures where the person was in the long sleeve shirt. I don't know if it was jeans or dark pants. He said the last 2 do look like Tyler. He also mentioned that he had talked to Tyler's friends about it. They talked about the fact that Twiggs Twiggs had gamed with Tyler. They did what was called, quote, party games, end quote, something about a pirate and co-op games. I'm not a gamer. I'm not sure what that is. He indicated that Twiggs, was just out of high school when he first came into contact with Tyler, they played some shooting games, but that was, way before they became roommates and stuff like that. Then they got to the question, and this is where I am wondering about the element of I forget what it's called, the political, right? The enhancement, okay? We could call it the hate enhancement, but it's not. That's not the word for it. I apologize. I don't have that pulled up. But right, because of Charlie Kirk's beliefs and that stuff, the targeting, the enhancement for the targeting. When asked about it, Twiggs said that Tyler was more involved in politics, more so than Twiggs was, and that it might have been that, when he went to work, they talked about it when Tyler went to work because his crew was always in the same car. Now, here's the thing. He said he never heard him talk about Charlie Kirk specifically. And that may be a problem unless the state comes up. Well, they don't have a chance because the state rested today. Sorry, I forgot the lead. The state rested today, so they don't have anybody that I'm aware of, unless possibly the text messages that shows the element for Charlie Kirk. I'm going to have to look at that. Like I said, I'm going to go through the whole thing. But Twiggs said he never heard him talk about Charlie Kirk specifically. He said he never really talked about gender and the LGBTQ community and stuff like that. He said he did hear him talk about Trump or current policies being issued or voted on. That's what he heard him talk about. Then it went blank. They talked about that Twiggs is known by the name Luna sometimes. He says some people, but not as an overall thing. Then it went blank again, so not really sure what they were getting there. Then they talked about the Dremel, which is a engraving device, and that Tyler had asked him about the Dremel because he wanted to engrave the bullets. And Twiggs told him that it was in the lower basement, in the lower basement level in the pantry. And I made a note here about, did they test for tool mark identification? And yes, they did. We're going to talk about that. So we got to hear that today. The state asked if McBride was present at the interview. Yes, he was on the Zoom. And was it fair and accurate? Now, remember, this is coming in through the 1102 statement, okay? They also were, Davis was also asked if Twiggs was shown text between he and Tyler, the Discord chats, and the handwritten notes and the FBI press release. And he said, yes, he was. Then they were talking about photographs directly from Lance's phone, that in the first interview, that this was the text. This is how they're trying to go to the chain of custody to get the text messages in, okay? So according to Davis, in the first interview with the FBI agents, if you remember, Tyler was over at Washington County Sheriff's Office, and Davis went there, and it was the FBI that interviewed Twiggs, I believe, over at the St. George Police Department. So 2 separate locations. So they're asking, were these photos taken directly from Lance's phone in the first interview? And they said yes, on September 12th. He spoke to one agent, right? So they're trying to authenticate that the FBI took those photos because they're showing us those photos, and we're not seeing a Cellbrite dump, right? So they have to connect the dots on those. And so they're saying that, yes, the FBI took them. And then Davis spoke to the FBI agent, okay, And Agent Larson of the FBI authenticated the photos. So we're going from the note from Twigs to the phone at the interview that was shown to the FBI, and then the FBI took photos, and then the FBI agent who took the photos talked to Davis, who's authenticating it, right? And this is where they're kind of going back about hearsay and stuff. And this is where I'm saying they're not calling these witnesses, right? They're only using certain witnesses. They're not using firsthand present witnesses. And why? And I said in the other video, is it because they don't want them to get impeached? They're saving them for trial. I don't know. Okay. Then they were asked, did they do a phone dump? Which was my question. Yes. And they said yes. In the second interview, also, Davis confirmed the photos. We didn't see some of the photos, but they confirmed some of the video. We heard just audio. They confirmed it because there was a big crack on Twigs's phone, and that's how Twigs authenticated the photos, because he was viewing the picture that the FBI agent took of his phone, and he recognized his phone by the big crack on it. Okay, to connect the dots. So then, to further identify it, Davis was asked, when the texts were shown, did somebody individually verify that the second party that was showing up as Tyler, you could see it said Tyler, was identified in the phone as Tyler? And he said, yes, it was. And he matched the phone number, right? He went behind the text message to get the phone number for the contact, and the phone number matched the number that law enforcement had. They did the celebrate, they did the review, and everything was the same. So everything is lining up with the pictures that were taken by the FBI. So the first text, these are two of the texts, and this was September 10th at 11 p.m. and it says, quote, "Drop what you're doing, comma, look under my keyboard," and end quote. And then the second one says, "FUCK, I tried to delete that," end quote. Okay. That's how he found out about it. And they go back and forth in those text messages. And the last text that he received, Twigs received from Tyler, was just before 8 p.m. on September 11th, around 7:42 p.m. Let's see. They talked about Discord, that they put a subpoena to Discord. At 7:57 p.m. on September 11th was the first Discord message. They talked about how Tyler arrived at Washington County Sheriff's Office around 9 p.m. Some of the things were shown only to the gallery. The handwritten note was found at 11 p.m. on September 10th, 2025. Lance's phone was taken. It was downloaded. They said that it went to the RCFL to the SIAC, which is the DPS Fusion Center. Agent Davis said he did not speak to the RCFL, but he did speak to the FBI or SBI officers. And that, again, he authenticated the photos with Twigs in the second interview, which was the Zoom interview. They talked about the FBI images that were shown. And on September 10th, okay, they talked about a text thread and the quote that if any police ask you questions, stay silent, end quote. That's probably going to go to the obstruction, right? So if they can authenticate the text messages coming in accurately and being identified through the 1102 properly, Okay, that's probably going to go to one of the obstruction. I think we have a couple obstruction charges. Then the Agent Davis was asked if he recognized the defendant in the courtroom, and he said yes, he was in a gray suit and a green tie. And then there was no cross-examination. We next see Sergeant Jen Falomina back again. Remember, she was there the other day. They had to bring her back because they had to put the other evidence tech on because these things get all kinds of crazy, and people are only available. They're testifying in different cases and things, and you never know when they're going to be available. So you have to take them when you can get them. So she said that she was first assigned September 10th around 1:30 in the afternoon. And she came from the headquarters in Salt Lake. She arrived near the south end of campus. She went to the headquarters in the Fugel building, which was south of the courtyard. She said at the time, officers were canvassing, looking for a suspect, looking for injured people, and keeping unauthorized people out. And this was still at 1:30, according to her. She said her role was to oversee the crime scene and secure evidence. She was involved in searching and clearing. They talked about the areas being the courtyard amphitheater, the Fulton Library with 2 bus stops, a wooded area, and the Low C Center. She talked about that the Utah State, she was asked if she was present, like who did the roof, who was in charge of the roof. And she said it was the Utah State Crime Lab who was on the roof. Okay, they were responsible for the roof. They did documents, or they documented with sketches, photos, marking, labeling, IDing, anything probative is the word she used. Those things are the screwdriver, the shooter's perch, and she said it was easy to see at night with oblique light. And they looked at northeast edge swipes at the drop-off point, hand marks that caused a disturbance. She talked about the edge of the roof, right below the window below, and talked about they took latent prints off the window. She was asked if they did measurements of the distance from the perch to the tent, and she talked about 415 feet from the perch to the tent. But then she referenced that there was an angle down, and she said it was 410 feet without the elevation drop, and they talked about there's a 68-foot vertical drop. They also talked about shoe impressions on the rooftop were collected. We haven't seen any of that, I don't believe. She talked about the latent in the palm print that Alyssa Farmer looked at, 11B, 11C, and 11D. Only 3 were of value, and they excluded Tyler. The others were of no value. Apparently, it was then sent to the FBI, and the FBI review was inconclusive. We'll talk about that a little bit later. In the courtyard, she was asked to describe the courtyard. She said the courtyard was like 5 or 6 steps covered in grass. There were personal belongings spread around, and the tent was on the west side. They took photos, they examined the tent area, and the FBI took that area. The FBI was responsible for that area. She also talked about the wooded area on the northeast part of the Low C Center building across from Campus Drive. There, they found a rifle in a dark-colored towel. This was prior to 6 p.m. She got a call from the Utah County SO because they had looked on the video. You know, why did they go to that area? Because they got video from the UVU security footage, and they thought whoever was the shooter, right? They saw whoever this person was ran towards the wooded area. So they sent Utah County Sheriff's Office over there. They saw this towel and they were told to hold the area. And then Special Agent Comack, if I'm saying that right, with the FBI evidence response team, and Sergeant Philomena went over there. So she described it. She was asked to describe it. She says, in the bushes, there was a dark towel. They showed the picture. You could kind of see it. It was pretty covered by leaves, but you could see some dark areas. She said, remember, because we were talking about some of these things, how the pictures that we've been shown in the hearing have all the evidence tags and everything. We don't have pictures in their natural state. Okay, it's all been when people have been involved in it, right? You want to see how they first came upon it. And my question was, do we have those photos? So yes, there's one photo. I think there might be 3 photos. There's one with the bush, and you can kind of see the parts of the black towel or the dark towel, blue towel on the edges. It's really covered by leaves. And then there's one that's a little zoomed in. I don't know if they just zoomed in or there's another zoom in. And then we see a picture of, I guess it's a what do you call that? Like a paper, craft paper. I don't know, whatever it is, like the color of paper bags, brown. I can't think of it. Craft paper, but it's a box, right? It's a brown box for the size of the rifle. And we can see the barrel of the rifle, and we can see this dark towel that's over it. I'm not sure if it's blue or black, navy or black. And so she says, in the bushes, they saw the dark towel. They took pictures. Then she said, and the defense caught this, the towel was removed. And then they saw that it was used to wrap the gun. We do have 3, 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and photos of the weapon were published. But this was interesting here because she said the towel was removed. Okay. She said the FBI removed it, placed the gun on the cardboard box, and packaged the towel separately. Talked about to document how it was found. They made it safe. There was nothing. They made it safe, so there was nothing in the chamber of the gun. And to do that, they had to manipulate the bolt. And she was asked about how that happens, right? Because in a bolt action gun, that no casing just pops out of the gun, right? You gotta work the action to get the cartridge out. So she said she was present when the gun was made safe, and that there was one 30-06 fired cartridge casing and 3 unfired cartridges, or 3 unfired rounds, all with engravings on them. All 4 had engravings. The towel was packaged and went to the FBI. The gun was packaged and went to the FBI, then to the ATF. The cartridges and casing went to the FBI and then to the ATF, and they were photographed during testing, 19, 20, 21, and 22. And they talked about the writing on this. I think it's been published. The one says, the one that was in the chamber said, quote, "Notices bulge, OWO, what's this?" End quote. Then the next one said, "Hey, fascist, catch this," with arrows. And then, "Oh, Bella, chow, chow, chow." And then, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO. Then she went to St. George for the search warrant. Okay, they did the search warrant on the residences, right? Tyler's house and the parents. She was asked when the DNA and prints were taken from Tyler. She says that was at the Utah County Jail. And after arrest, they took his clothing, his shirt, his pants, his shoes, his underwear, and the stuff in his pockets, and he was wearing a maroon top at that time. They went to Twig's house. They took the Dremel tool and the bits, whatever you call the little engraving pieces. They found some Remington 30-06 ammunition. They found casings for a 30-06. They found rifles, a revolver, and burned paper. We didn't see all that. We did see some of it. The clothing and shoes, they took more clothing and shoes and 2 pairs of Converse. One was gray, 10.5, and the other, she said, was a different size. She couldn't really describe that. In the spare bedroom of the house, no, sorry, in the bedroom that was Tyler's, which she identified, she said she could tell it was Tyler's because they found documents in the bedroom on top of a safe. It's a little, I'm reading this now and it's a little confusing. Because now here's how she described it. On the second floor, there's 2 bedrooms on the south end. The southeast is Tyler's, and on the southwest, there's the spare bedroom. On the north end is Twig's bedroom. In the southwest spare bedroom, they found a cartridge engraved, quote, "test shot," end quote. They found 5 casings for 30-06 Springfield, quote, "the same type of round as found in the gun," end quote. No other 30-06 weapons were found in the house. They then talked about targets, used targets that were found in the house, and the Dremel tool and the bits being the sharp part. She said they took photos in place, and then those items were sent to the ATF. We didn't see those photos. The targets were photographed. We did see those, and they went through a thing asking her if those holes in the target were consistent with rounds, bullets going through them. We then saw the burnt note in the trash can. It was found in the trash can in the kitchen. She described it like a campfire. Someone burns paper. It was sent to the FBI, and we tried to see it this time. I don't know if you guys find the same thing. This camera person, it was horrible. Didn't zoom in enough. It wasn't clear. Couldn't tell. Very hard to see. She said there was some writings on the note on the left edge. I don't know if this is a practice note before the note left under the computer. Like, I don't know. It's very hard to see. They showed they talked about the image of the note left for Twigs under the keyboard. They found a car. They found Tyler's car at his parents' house. They described it as a gray Dodge Challenger. And then they talked about the ATF report on the gun and cartridges. Okay. So they did swabs of the stock and the grip, swabs of the bolt. And here's the answer. Okay, this again the same thing. It is 1 trillion more likely that the major contributor was Tyler and 3 unrelated people than 4 unrelated people. Remember, I talked about, if you didn't watch the DNA video, go watch the DNA video about this language that they use. They have the defense the HD and the HP, the defense hypothesis and the prosecution hypothesis, and it's either this suspected person and 3 randoms, or not this person and any other people or something. It's very confusing language. I go into a lot of detail there, but this was what was interesting to me. This is the stock and the grip. So the way that they tested, we talked about, and go back and listen to that if you haven't, how they dial in the number of contributors, right? We went through a whole thing about how the defense went through this whole thing about how the calculation of contributors is completely subjective, right? That the analyst has to decide it, and how do they decide it, and how complex mixtures are, and all that stuff. Please watch the DNA section, because there's 4 people on item 1.1 and 1.4. There's 4 people. Okay. 4 contributors. Let's say 4 contributors. 1.2, the butt plate. It's 1 trillion times more likely that Tyler is the major contributor than 4 unrelated people. Means there's 5 contributors on the butt plate. 5. Okay. They went up, down, sideways on that testimony. Then they talk about the trigger guard, the trigger and the trigger guard. 1 trillion times more likely that Tyler is the major contributor than, and with 3 unrelated people, than 4 unrelated unknown people. So there's 4 people on the trigger. Let me back up. 4 contributors on the trigger. Then they talk about the cartridge, one of the cartridges. It says 1 .30-06 cartridge from the gun. 1 trillion times more likely from Tyler and 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated individuals. So that's 3 people, 3 contributors. Now watch my words. Remember, language matters. Okay. Then they did swabs of the barrel and 1 .30-06 cartridge from the gun. 1 trillion times more likely that Tyler is the major contributor with 2 unknown individuals than 3 individuals unknown. So 3 contributors again. Then this was the optical accessory, which they called the scope. 6.2 billion times more likely that Tyler was the major contributor with 3 other unrelated people than 4 unknown contributors. So there was 4 contributors total. It's a lot of people touching that gun. And here's a question. Did they get elimination samples from the FBI agents and the SBI agents that handled that gun? So are these 4 unrelated people, or the 3 plus Tyler, did they do other eliminations on that to get rid of those other people? Right? And we're the peaks. Remember in the DNA, we talked about the peak. Did it meet the 150 threshold? All right. Okay. Then they talked about the ATF report. The gun was in operable condition. And they said that the cartridge case, right, the empty one, was identified as having been fired from that gun. Okay. Then they moved on to tool marks. The tool marks, number 2 and number 3, were consistent with engraving tools and rotary tips installed in a Dremel tool. And there was a note there, if the tool is located. Could be compared if the tool is located. Well, the tool was located. So that didn't make sense. So I'm a little confused about that. I got to go back and look at that. So I don't know when that report came out, but they did the search warrant on the 12th. So they should have had that. So I don't understand. Yeah. Well, maybe because when they're asked to test stuff, they only sometimes usually only test what they're asked to test. And so the cartridges came in, and so they're looking at it to see that it's consistent with engraving tools in general, okay, and rotary tips. But apparently, I'm guessing, I don't know, I'm hypothesizing that one of the detectives didn't say send the Dremel tool down to be compared with the cartridges, because they have to be told sometimes what to do. So maybe at this point they hadn't said take this particular Dremel tool and tips and compare it, because it was. We'll get to there. Okay. They also said the bullet jacket fragment and the other Kirk fragments. A 130 caliber class deformed jacketed fragment, bullet jacket fragment, and 4 lead fragments cannot be identified or excluded. It was inconclusive for the weapon. Okay. And the lead fragments were not suitable for microscopic comparison. Okay. Then we got the Dremel. And I just want to make sure, because hold on 1 second, because I want to make sure I mentioned something. I gotta find it. Okay, the good part's coming up later. Okay. All right, so we got the Dremel at the ATF, and they swabbed the buttons of the Dremel. Guess what? Guess what? It's however it says, I gotta say this right. It's 1 trillion more likely that Tyler is the major contributor than, and I'm probably saying this wrong, but you know what I'm saying. 1 trillion more likely that Tyler and 2 unrelated contributors were present versus 3 unrelated individuals. And they also added that the probability that the unrelated are less than 1 in 1 trillion. I don't know if that's some ethnicity thing or whatever. Again, I'm hearing this. I didn't get to see the document. I need to see the document. It's very hard to parse all these numbers as they're talking fast. Okay, so I apologize, but we'll get to it. Okay. Then they looked at, now we got the Dremel. They looked at the cord of the tool, the longest bit and the shortest bit, and 1 30-06 cartridge from the safe, and the test shot. Okay, and guess what? Guess what? The DNA is 1 trillion more likely that Tyler was a major contributor than with 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated contributors alone. Same stuff. Okay. Then they got to the ATF report on the tool marks, and they looked at the 5 30-06 Springfield fired. These were casings that were found on the safe in one of the bedrooms in the house, and 15 40 caliber bullets. And they showed them in a picture. They were lined up on there. And they looked at the test shot. There was a casing there that had engraving on it that said test shot. So they said the tool marks were numerous, consistent with rotary tool marks of value for comparison. Then they said that the test shot was fired in Exhibit 1. So there was a casing on the safe in the room that was fired from the rifle. Then they looked at the longest tip and the shortest tip, and I believe she said that those tools made the marks on the casings. Okay. Okay. Then they went to talk about video surveillance. Okay. They're now going back to the video that demonstrates the suspect's behavior in that area. That's what they said. Okay. And they said, you can see the suspect at 12:23:47 on the roof in the gravel part close to the northeast side. They said, could you see if the suspect touched the glass? Okay. And she says later from direct footage, remember we talked about this, zoom in, that we couldn't see because we didn't get the zoom. The zoom didn't get in because it was altered. And I talked about hopefully they're going to be able to go back to the original thing, the original viewing. I don't know if they have to buy a camcorder or whatever it is they got to buy so that they could, you guys were talking about optical zoom versus whatever zoom, I don't know what you call it, but they need to have the native zoom with the film or the camera, the digital file in the machine that does it so that we could zoom in the machine the right way that it's supposed to be done. And we didn't have that, but apparently they looked at it somehow. And when they looked at it, right, we need that for trial because this thing from far away is very hard to see. But they looked at it, Philomena looked at it, and she said the suspect did not touch the window. Okay, so remember, those prints came back not Tyler. So they said it's very clear. So they said, I mean, not those exact words, but he didn't touch the window. So I know you guys are all going to be like, well, we need to zoom in and see if he touched the window, right? Okay. All right. Now, the defense is cross-examining Philomena. So they start talking to her about reports, and they talk about that in this case, apparently they're referring to a 229-page report. Now remember, she's in charge of all the crime scene and everything like that. He got her to agree that nine reports, supplements out of the whole thing were hers. Typically, the whole thing is called the incident report. The initial one, the face sheet, and the initial narrative is called the initial report. And then you have all these supplements, okay? And they should be numbered, and you should know that they're supplements, okay? So the defense says, okay, you're right, he's talking to her. So on 9/22/25, you documented the overview of the crime scene, and you write about the Fulton Library. And she said, yes, we did that because we were trying to find the route of the shooter. And there were unattended items. Remember I talked about the Fulton Library and the bus stop, the two bus stops? She said that there were unattended items that might be suspicious. There was a backpack, jacket, and gloves that were sent to the FBI. And they were presumed to be, quote, shed as fled, end quote, meaning shed, taken off, thrown down as the shooter left the area. So they requested DNA and other analysis at the time it was sent out. And she said she didn't know whether it was probative, that's a word they like using, at the time, and so they just sent it off. So then he asked her, well, why was the testing on it canceled? And she said, I don't know anything about that. So why was that canceled? I thought we heard didn't we hear something? Well, it wouldn't have been at the bus stop, would it? We heard something. I heard something. I don't remember. I thought I mentioned it, that they said some other backpack thought they belonged to Charlie Kirk's security or something like that. But this is over by the I don't know. But this is over by the library. So she didn't know apparently that it was canceled. So whose stuff was that? Right. We got more stuff. We got more unattended. Sorry, my hair's driving me crazy. More unattended stuff. All right. So her next report was on September 24, 25, and it was a request for a search of the firearm through NIBIN from ATF. Okay. And that is a system that tracks the casings, right? They can match them. And she said that nothing of value came from that. All right, then here he comes, and he's getting her on these reports. And I know, like, I'm chuckling here because I was gonna talk. I was thinking about what I was gonna use for the thumbnail before I did this one, and I was gonna say something about like words matter or whatever because you guys were asking me about semantics and the words, and then the state said, what did I say? I don't even language matters, right? So the defense is going to town on the wording, right? And reports. Man, these reports have to be accurate. If you all have watched some of my other things, man, I will tag them for not writing a good report. And it's so critical. But here we go. So the defense is challenging her, and he says, you wrote, quote, we seized the towel, end quote. And so he's like, who's we? And she says, well, I was there as well as the FBI. So he says, right, because we seized it. So he's like, he didn't show it, but like, I'm illustrating what he's saying. So we, like, you both grabbed it? And she's like, no, Michelle Comack from the FBI, she grabbed it, right? So he's like, well, why are you writing we? We seized, okay? So she says, Michelle Comack reached into the bushes and pulled it out. And I will say here that I think, to Philomena's credit, is she's talked about the general we, like police seized, like we, not I grabbed it, right? I think she would have said I grabbed it. She's just talking about the general. We seized it, meaning the police took it into custody, okay? But he's tagging her on all this stuff. Okay. So the defense was asking how it happened because remember earlier I said that she said they pulled the towel off first. And so he's asking about that. And they start showing these photos. So we only have these 3 photos. We have the photo of it really covered in the bush. You can kind of hardly see the dark area. It's zoomed in. And then here's the rifle in the brown box with a towel on it. And so he starts asking, are those the best photos that you have? Don't you have more photos? And she's like, no. So she's there. She's the forensics person. She don't take any photos. And the FBI, somebody just snapped a couple photos from their phone. I'm guessing from their phone because we only have the 3. And so he's like, those all the photos that you have? She goes, yeah. But she says somebody was there wearing a body-worn camera. So we need to see that body-worn camera. And then we can talk about this towel issue. And I don't mean to harp on the towel issue. What, did they take the towel off first or did they not take the towel off first? But that's important, and the words and the semantics and the usage, because somebody can get impeached from that. Okay, this is sworn testimony. It has to be right. Okay, they're going to tag her on it. Okay, so he asked, well, what process was it removed from the rifle? She says it wasn't removed from the rifle. And then, right, that's what she said earlier. So she says, let me clarify. They took it out. Comack took it out of the woods under the bush and put it on the cardboard together. And then they took the photo. She says, quote, we processed it. Again, the we. And that they were, quote, coordinating, that her role was coordinating, right? So he talked her through, like, you did this, or, you were standing there, or who's the we, okay? Because a we can be like, I touched it. Did I touch it? Do we need an elimination print? Like, who actually did it? Let's get details here. So then they brought it back to the command post. She says she did not personally observe the seizure of the screwdriver. That was done by the state crime lab. Then she was asked, when did she review the running video. Okay, and that's the one across the roof. She said on September 10th, and the windows were processed on September 11th. Now, what is the defense doing here? Where are they going with this? Well, I have an idea, because remember, those prints don't match Tyler. Think about that. So who is on the roof? I'm not saying one way or the other, but somebody's going to ask the question, who is on the roof? Whose prints are those? Right? Does the video clearly show, when you zoom in, which we can't, that the person didn't touch the window? All questions to ask. Okay. Then she wrote a report 9/24/25, which was just a forensic analysis results, I guess, providing results. Then he talks about the 5th report was the progress of the crime scene processing. The 6th report was the firearm, that there was a firearm seized at River Street, and they did a firearm trace. She's reporting about that. I don't know what that is. Does anybody know what that is? Apparently, well, let me not say apparently, they did a Nyman search, which maybe they got a potential match, but they went and she said seized. Okay, so they seized the gun. So did they have a search warrant to seize a gun? I don't know what River Street is. Is River Street one of their houses? Maybe that's it, because they said they seized other guns. I don't know where they lived. If it's at River Street, then maybe they did a trace on a gun seized somewhere. I don't know, but some gun was seized at River Street. I don't know anything about it. And she wrote a report about a firearm trace, and we don't know what that is, right? Another gun, another suspect. I don't know. We got to keep asking questions. All right. The 7th report was about latents from the state crime lab results. We don't know which latents. Then the 8th report was about the transfer of evidence from the FBI to the SBI, meaning they probably got parts back. And then the 9th report was summarizing some forensic reports. Okay. They also talked about interviewing associates of Robinson to find anyone, nobody, nothing else was involved. They were also asked about monitoring his jail mail, and she said she was not abreast of that. She had no idea. So she didn't know if there was anything of value that came from the jail mail. If you don't know that, they monitor all the communications. Okay, and then the state rested. Okay. So now we have the defense introducing another federal witness. This was Samantha Carter, a firearms examiner from the Washington Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. She works in the Forensic Science Laboratory. She's been there for 6 years. She is a firearm and toolmark examiner. I couldn't read my writing. She fired the ammunition. She did conduct exams. Can't read my writing. So she did the firearm test fire and cartridge cases. So she got 3 cartridges. She test fired 3. Sorry, I can't read my writing. She test fired and looked at the 1 bullet jacket and 4 fragments. She also looked at tool marks, and she did a general rifling search on the fragment. Now, they started talking about here, and I just want to make sure. 1 second. Okay, still surprise, still coming. Okay. So they started talking about this languaging thing. Okay, so going back to the DNA, there's this guidance from the Department of Justice, right? That's for all the federal agencies about what they can say and what they can't say and how they can make conclusions. what their reports can say and how they can testify. Okay, so they are, and I talked about in the DNA one, these things are very limiting. I think they're limiting for the state and they're limiting for the defense. Okay, it's limiting. And the question is, should experts or professionals or whatever be limited in what they can say about the work that they do? Okay, I haven't read these things. I have to get them. We can go through them, but I don't think you should be limited. I think you'd be professional, but you shouldn't be limited. Okay, so we got the same things about what they can say and what they can't say. So he's asking about what is the purpose and scope of this policy. He asked, was it published because of criticism that prior testimony was, quote, beyond the bounds of science, end quote. You guys might want to look at that. Okay, so now they're limited. I talk about when looking at police officers and police stuff, working in a police department, you get what's called operations orders or SOP, standard operating policy. And I always say, they're big books. You get a new one when somebody does a boo-boo, okay? And some liability attaches or people get scared. And guess what? There's a new procedure for that to cover that, okay? That's normally the reason, they're not proactive, they're reactive. A majority of the time that something bad happens, and so they have to edit the policy or put the policy out or whatever. And that sounds like, to me, again, I don't know about this, but the defense is saying, wasn't this policy published after a boo-boo, after there was criticism of people testifying beyond the bounds of science? Like, that's some good words there, right? Okay. So they're going back and forth again. They're talking about it. And ultimately, the conclusion is the examiners. Okay, that's what she's saying. But they can't identify a source or exclude a source based on the uniqueness of an item of evidence. Okay, so they cannot say that it's this gun or this bullet or this thing to the exclusion of anything else. And here's what she said, quote, I have not looked at every firearm that's been manufactured in the world, nor have I looked at every tool that's been manufactured in the world, end quote. She's a firearms and toolmark examiner. So how do you feel about that? That they can never say with 100% certainty that that is exactly the thing, that is exactly the tool, that is exactly the bullet, that is exactly the gun. They can't say that. So, like, that's what I'm saying. Why is this document limiting it? Right? So I was going to say, well, we have DNA. Well, no, we don't have DNA because they can't say that either. Right? Because they're limited over there too. So should we have these federal agencies making these half conclusions? Right? And I'm not on one side or the other, but if you can't get a full answer out of somebody, what does that mean to our court system, right? Does it make sense what I'm saying? Like, I don't mean to be fired up about it, but I'm like, no, nobody tells me how I form my opinion. I'm talking about what I'm talking about and how I arrived at my conclusion. And to be told that what's the point of having an expert if the expert can't talk about their expertise, right? Anyway, so, then we're going through the same thing as we have with the DNA. They can't say it's to the exclusion of all others, that they can't say that it's not fallible. They can't say that it's zero error rate. They can't provide a statistic. They can't, and this was kind of interesting. They can't cite the number of exams conducted in review. So typically we see in search warrant applications, you have to show knowledge and authority. That's not the right word, but for you to be able to articulate to a judge about why you want to look for narcotics in this particular house. You say, well, I've, taken 52 classes in drug identification. I've worked undercover as a narcotics officer for 7 years. I've made thousands of narcotics arrests. I've, bought and sold hundreds of samples. I've tested hundreds of samples, right? To show that you know what a drug is. Like you know what that is, right? But yet here they're saying, okay, let me give you an example. I don't mean to laugh, but they're saying that the federal person cannot say how many exams they've conducted in their career. So that's like going to a heart surgeon and saying, how many bypass operations have you performed? And them saying, I can't tell you that. It doesn't matter. Right? I mean, don't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want to know that? I get asked how many homicide cases I've worked, how many identifications I've made, all kinds of things, right? Think about that. Who would you want? Yeah, I'm thinking of the heart surgeon, right? Doing the bypass or whatever, or the heart transplant surgeon. Well, how many of these have you done? The nurse surgeon, the brain surgeon. Well, how many surgeries like that have you done? But no. That doesn't matter. They can't tell you. Don't like that. Okay. Same thing. They can't say to the scientific certainty and all that stuff. Then the defense asked, did you rely on documented photos? Yes. So they talk about, they take photos, they write notes, and then they write reports. The defense was trying to get into the notes and the case file. There was a little bit of back and forth because it is all of these things that make the conclusion or the final findings report. They were talking about how the standard operating procedure for the division requires documenting the basis of opinions in the case notes, right? So the defense was good at going after that and saying, look, they're basing their conclusion on the notes and they're required to put the notes in there. So we need to see it. Then they asked about whether or not the report contains conclusions. And then they're talking about the bullet jacket fragment. Remember, that was one. And then the 4 fragments from the autopsy. Well, guess what? Did you know? So here's what he says. Defense says, were you told about the discrepancy about the loss of fragments from the medical examiner? Like, oh my God. Right? And so apparently, she says when she got the little manila envelope from the medical examiner, it was sealed and there were only 4 fragments in there. So I don't know if you guys know about that, but apparently some fragments are out in somewhere, okay? That somehow between the ME and the toolmark, the firearms lady, three fragments are in the wind, or someone can't count, or something. I would want to get the audio notes from the autopsy and transcribe that, because when they pull it out, they'll be like 1, 2, 3. They should, right? And get the photos, and I don't know if they video it or they just photo it, but they should be documenting and weighing those fragments potentially when they come out. So our answer will be right there about where it went, because it disappeared somewhere. So I don't know if the defense or somebody has pulled that autopsy audio and video and all that nonsense to see what happened to her. Okay. So she said her process was that she took the larger bullet fragment, which was the jacket of the bullet. She cleaned it, and then, it was all bent back. She described it like a peeled banana, which was a good analogy. So she cleaned it, and then she's trying to straighten out those pieces. Obviously, easy to straighten out the banana peel, but not so much in the metal jacket. And then he asked, well, how do you do that? And she said, I use pliers. We're looking at tool marks, people. Looking at tool marks and ridges. Like, I did not expect that. Pliers. What do pliers have? Ridges. Look, crimping. Pliers. Okay. I don't know. I don't do tool marks. Okay. Then they went back and forth about class, individual, and subclass characteristics. And I'm just looking at my notes here because apparently, because it went on and on and on and on, trying to get to how she determines whether there were matches between these things or not matches between these things. And I will tell you that well, let me go to this. Because the defense has got something, they're on a bone, like they were on the bone with the DNA. And we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more of that. Dueling experts, they're going to get people to come in and let me talk about it a little bit more. But yeah, so she talked about, he asked about how she's able to narrow the range of guns by caliber. Okay. And she says she does it by general class. And in this case, for my gun people, item 6A, she said the diameter was between 0.286 and 0.301 inches. And she said the direction of the twist was 6R. And she said that she had to provide a range because of the damage to the base. She said that several different .30 calibers possibly fired the bullet jacket. Okay, she could not narrow it down. Then he asked if she has an examination procedure, talking about classes and subclasses, and not really. Okay, so then he's asking, well, who decides? You know, like who says, here is what you should look for. You need to look for X, Y, and Z to make this determination. Like, let me give you an example. Like in the DNA, right? They said, okay, we're looking for 150 and above. Okay, well here, there's apparently nothing. And he was really digging into this, trying to get this. Then he asked her, was there debris and dust in the barrel? And she says, yes. I think it says dust. Then he asks her, he tells her, you ruled out subclass. And then moved on to individual characteristics. And then she said, yes, talking about lands and grooves. And then he says there's no SOP for this, right? Again, so there's no standards back and forth. He asked if she provides test bullets. She said yes, to see if it comes through, the individual characteristics. She fired 6 total, 3 sets. And her SOP only requires 2. So I thought that was interesting. Anytime there's a difference in number, she only needed 2. Why did she fire 6? Then, so they were going back and forth about what she could find and what she couldn't find and why she couldn't find it. And wasn't there a rule for that and all that stuff. And then he says, were you informed that this gun was manufactured in Germany in 1938? And that the ATF investigated this? And she said no. And he asked, well, isn't it important to know the manufacturing process of the gun? And she said, quote, it's helpful, end quote. And that certain manufacturing techniques will lead to individual characteristics. Again, trying to include or exclude these bullets, these casings, and all these things. And so she has made her determination. I think where he's going here is that she's made her determination which she can't say all these words and things, right, because of this guideline. But she didn't know that it was manufactured in Germany. Okay, so I would immediately say, well, are manufacturing standards different in Germany? Is their metal different? Do they, I mean, 1938, I don't know. Was she thinking it was a, I don't, what was it, a Mauser or whatever it was? Was she thinking that it was like a Remington, that a Remington manufactured in 1938 is the same Remington that's manufactured in 2025? Like, I don't know. I don't know. But she didn't know that. Okay. So, um, then he was talking about comparing between test fires, asking about if she ever had any discrepancies, and she said no. Uh, and then he talked about, can there be differences between each bullet? And she said possibly. They started talking about this AFTE standard, this theory, the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. The state came in and wanted to voir dire the witness. And then they argued because the ATF protocol refers to this AFTE standard, and that's when the state said language matters. And the lady said that per the AFTE, quote, conclusions are my opinion, end quote. So, okay, great. But let's go back to the fact in the document. This is why I'm harping on this. Let's go back to that document that says that you can't say certain things. But it's your opinion, but you can't say certain things. So he's talking about, the defense is talking about the correspondence of individual characteristics between rounds or bullets. And she said she can make a source ID, but not all of it in the world, right? So she can say, it's consistent with or whatever, but she can't say that there's not another gun that would do the same thing. And then she said, quote, I would expect any trained, competent examiner to come to the same conclusion, end quote. Right? They were talking about her work product and how she does her work and all these SOPs and this AFTE standard. I'm telling you, she's going to get somebody, the defense is going to get somebody that's going to come in that's going to be a trained, competent examiner, give a different opinion. I guarantee it. Okay. So she said that. Then the state came in again. They talked about the report had already been entered into evidence. He was talking about credibility. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, impeachment's coming down the pike. Okay. And then they talked about the state was saying that it's the court's job, or it's not the court's job to weigh contrary evidence. And that's why I pulled up the probable cause thing to just read that. Okay. And 6A, so item 6A, the jacket fragment, could not be identified or excluded based on class characteristics and individual characteristics. So it's inconclusive about coming from that gun. So she said there's not sufficient agreement or it did not meet the threshold. Then he started talking about another NAS study in 2009. I told you they're tagging him. He's getting them. Where they found that, I don't know, I was writing so quickly, about tool marks and firearm theory, but there's no protocol. And then he asked her, he said, let me see how long has she been doing this? Because it's important. Hold on. I was told to not be quiet, so I'm trying to not be quiet. When did she come in? Sorry, guys. I'll keep talking so you know that the screen hasn't frozen. I think it's important. Sorry. 6 years. Okay. So 6 years she's been doing this. And he said, so you've only taken one proficiency test involving bullets in your career. Yes. That was in 2023. I'm not sure the year. Then he asked her, well, in that test, okay, so they pulled the test. I'm telling you, they're coming. They are coming. They pulled the test, or this test is in the public, okay? And maybe it was part of that NAS study. I'm not sure. But he had the test. And so in this test, he's telling her, in this test, you had to examine one fired from one gun and one fired from another gun. And she's like, I don't remember. And they started going back and forth about it. And she said, or did he say, or she said that in this testing, that there was a high error rate, right? That there was controversy about this testing, about this training, that this only one training that she went to, that there was controversy and there was a high error rate. And so he starts honing in on that. And she says, she says her answers were satisfactory. But her answer on this was inconclusive. And she talked about the ground truth, which I guess is what they're talking about. The expected answer, or the reality, was that the bullet they were given didn't come from either of the guns. And that was the answer. That was supposed to be the answer, that it didn't come from either of the guns. And the only thing she said was inconclusive. Okay. So what do we have in this case? Right? Do we have inconclusive or do we have conclusive? And right? So in her one proficiency test, no disrespect to her, she got it wrong. Although she says because of the high error rate or whatever, the inconclusive pass. So I don't know. Okay. And it continued on for a little bit with them going back and forth. The defense is honing in on this stuff. And then the judge was like, this is a preliminary hearing. We don't need to go into all this detail, right? Usually we see this at a Deseret or Fry challenge. It was all kinds of crazy. It was a very long day. I know this is a very long video. Thank you for staying with me. Hopefully this has been informative. We got one more day. I don't know how many more witnesses we have. I would love it if you haven't, if you would subscribe, really trying to reach 1,000. I'm working on a big case now on an ID, and I love to do that as well as talking to you guys, and you all will help me make it possible. So glad, hair's driving crazy. So glad to have you guys here. But we got one more day, and then I'm going to take it and I'm going to summarize it all, and I'll make it succinct and give you my take on it. Also, going to have some lives this weekend and continue on in the other cases. So thank you for being here. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. So far, it's been very, very interesting. Okay, so I will see you on the next one. Talk to you soon.